So we get an awful lot of phone calls here at Vudoo Gun Works about how do I disassemble my bolts? Can I change my own firing pin spring? If you have an original Vudoo, a Gen 1, we refer to it in-house, can I upgrade it to any of the new generations that are coming out? So I thought we'd take the time to go through the different generations that we have, why, and the really quick assembly and disassembly so you can decide for yourself if it's something that you want to undertake, as opposed to sending it to us and having us take care of it for you. So this is an original Gen 1 bolt, which is what most of you will have. We have thousands of these out there. We've only recently changed to a couple of the new generations. And why did we do so? We changed because this original one uses the Remington 700 cocking piece. And while they've been okay for decades and decades, they're made in a pretty old school way that will not let the dimensions be held to the tolerances we'd like to have. So we set about making our own cocking piece, which is what evolved into the additional generations we have. You can tell if you have a Gen 1 because you have the large Remington round cocking piece sticking in the back, as opposed to a Gen 1.2 or Gen 2, which has the small firing pin sticking out the back. I'll go through each one of those. But if you have a Gen 1 and you would like to do one of two things, either change your spring, disassemble it for cleaning, which you don't really need to do, but we've had some people get them gunked up enough they'd like to take them apart, or upgrade it to a Gen 1.2 fire control. This is how you do it. You need basically the same tool that you can get from Brownells. This is a Remington fire control removal tool, if you will. This is how you take your firing pin out of a Remington 700 short action. Many people already own this tool if they work on their guns or have a lot of Remington 700 stuff. It simply goes over your bolt shroud, hooks onto your cocking piece. You pull this to the rear and spin. You'll notice, because we're dealing with a rimfire, I am spinning the bolt handle and the bolt body. The bolt nose remains static because the rimfire firing pin is not down the center, so it can't spin. And it can't spin with the main cocking piece and shroud anyways. So we will spin this handle until it pops out, and you have your complete fire control out of your Gen 1 Vudoo. You don't need to take this down any further. Your bolt nose should spin nice and free like this if everything's working right. And you can gun scrubber this out. You can hose it out. Quite frankly, for cleaning, you can do that with this installed and put a little bit of oil back on things right through here and be good to go. But if you're going to change your spring, which we have some people elect to do, this is where you start getting into the necessity for some specialty Remington tools. This is one that we have here in-house that we've made for ourselves, but you can buy a similar tool from Brownells that allows you to put your fire control. Normally their tool would be handling it for a center fire, short action. We've made our own and modified some of the Remington ones originally to handle our rimfire stuff, but it literally goes in like this. It will cam this back so it takes the spring pressure off, and what the next goal is here is to drive this pin out of the cocking piece so that you can take it off. Once you've done that, you can open this back up, spin your shroud out, and your firing pin and firing pin spring are now separate. Whether that is something you want to undertake or not will have a lot to do with whether you want to end up buying tools like this from Brownells to do it. For a one-time operation, I'm not sure it's worth it. You can spend a couple $100 here pretty quick with these tools. But that's it in a nutshell for handling the disassembly of a Gen 1. Putting it back is just as simple as running it up until the cocking piece starts to interfere. You take your good old Brownells tool. We made this one. The Brownells one looks like this. Remove some of that relief. Turning the bolt body leaving the bolt nose static because, again, there's a firing pin in there at the 12 o'clock position that can't spin about the axis. And we'll run this up just past the cocking notch, bring it back to it, and you are back and all good to go. Sometimes, and it is not too hard to do, you can get this shroud turned and popped down into the fired notch, if you will. And that's kind of a problem because you can't get your bolt in. You can use a shoelace and a vise. There's a bunch of little deals. This tool's really handy if you have it. You need to make sure that it is up in that notch for you to be into the ready to go back into the firearm position. That's Gen 1. Gen 1.2 is really a combination of Gen 1 and Gen 2, what became Gen 2 brought together. Bolt nose and bolt body really are the same. Of course, all of our bolt handles are threaded, so in a couple of these I have no bolt knobs on, and this one I have a bolt knob installed. There is a different shroud, in this case, which is threaded, and the back end of the firing pin is a little bit different, and it goes through a new caulking piece that we made to try to eliminate some of the dimensional issues that can end up with Remington 700s and give you trouble with triggers not following and getting them real light and some of those kind of things. So this was one of our quests to continue to improve our product. There is a set screw, which is a .050 Allen wrench, very small, that is in this caulking piece that you need to back off just a little bit, like I just did. It helps keep the firing pin with a flat and the threads oriented the right direction. It's not really needed. It's a little bit of a safety backup, but all of our Gen 1.2 and Gen 2s have it. So don't just start twisting away without realizing that there is a set screw in there that must be loosened up. It doesn't have to come all the way out. You're just disengaging it from a flat in the threads on the firing pin. We took that same Brownells tool and modified it a little bit. As you can see, this one has a lever on it to interface with a catch on the caulking piece on a Remington 700. That doesn't exist on our Gen 1.2 caulking piece. So we took that, milled it off, and installed a pin so that that pin will go in where that set screw sets, allows you to pull it back just enough to start to rotate this handle and hold that into the rearward position to do exactly like we did with Gen 1, and that is to rotate that out. What is different between Gen 1 and Gen 1.2 is once you have that set screw loosened and this out of the bolt, you're now basically toolless. You do not need this type of a tool to manage it from there because this is threaded. So you can simply unthread. I'm holding the firing pin in place and I'm using the shroud to turn the caulking piece about the firing pin. And this will, watch out because this spring is under tension, so I'm keeping it in the palms of my hands so that when it does get to the end of its thread travel, it will simply pop out like that. Our caulking piece is now loose, our shroud, our spring, and our firing pin. And if you can see here closely with the firing pin out, you'll see these threads, and there's an interrupted flat right here. When this caulking piece is threaded on, that set screw is going into that flat to help maintain its alignment and to keep it where it should be. So it's as simple as then installing your new spring, laying your caulking piece into your shroud. I kind of get my hands twisted in a bit of a preparatory manner because you have to overcome the pressure of this spring by pushing together and then get the thread started. So I kind of get like this. There, I could feel a thread engage. Oop, didn't quite get it. There, I've got it. And now we're just going to thread this all the way until it stops. And that will not be quite centered up in the way that it should be. So It's very easy to know where this gets positioned. I just turned it all the way till it stops, and as you can see, it's out of alignment. So we just have to back this on off 1/2 or 3/4 of a turn until the flat on the bottom of your firing pin is lined up with the cocking piece, the sear area on your cocking piece. You can retighten this set screw, get it down until it goes snug. Take a little bit of a wiggle here. I could feel it fall in, and boom, there. 3 or 4 inch-pounds of torque. That set screw does not have to be torqued hard. It's an interference fit, and once it's in those flats, it's not coming out. So don't overdo it. It's very small. It's easy to strip the Allen portion, if you will, and not get it back out. And it is going to go back together just like the Gen 1 did. That simply in, thread the shroud in until you run into a distance you can't go anymore. In this case, we use this modified tool to pull back the cocking piece. I let it go there. It's kind of a third hand is nice job, but I can usually get it like that. There, then we're into our cocking notch and set. Is that worth it for you? It depends if you're handy. If you're interested in getting a regular Remington tool, grinding that off, milling it, we drilled a hole, put a cocking piece through pin in there and ground it down to a distance that works. So we just kind of made that tool in-house. It's otherwise very, very simple to do. So that is Gen 1.2. Gen 2, the big difference between it is the simplest of all, and essentially after you loosen your set screw, toolless. One of the big questions I get before I move on to Gen 2 is, man, should I upgrade my Gen 1 fire control to a Gen 1.2? It's a $100 bill because that shroud, threaded firing pin, and cocking piece is not inexpensive to manufacture on its own. Is it worth that $100 bill? No, I don't think so. If your gun's running great, you don't have any problems with your Gen 1, it's not having light strikes or any weirdness like that, I quite frankly don't think it's worth doing the upgrade. We've had some customers do it. They just wanted to. Awesome, and we're happy to sell you the parts for $100. But there's no compelling reason to. Our intention there was to reduce drag. We successfully did that. Lock time's a little bit quicker. I think unless you're a Olympic level shooter, the difference in lock time is probably not something you can realize some accuracy out of. There's an argument to be had about that, but I don't think it's particularly worth it. So that leads us on to Gen 2. Gen 2 is everything after serial number 3200. I'll have to double check that. Gen 2 is after 3200. It's very easy to tell. You have these small firing pins sticking out the back, and there's some additional new grooves in the top of your bolt nose and your bolt body because the side bolt release and an anti-rotation pin exist in Gen 2. If you don't have that, you don't have Gen 2. Is Gen 2 a whole bunch better than Gen 1 or Gen 1.2? Well, we're forever innovating, and so we think we've made incremental progress with it, but I must say every single one of the records that exist out there right now still exist with Gen 1. So I guess that remains to be seen. I sure wouldn't fret if I had a Gen 1 or sell it just to get a Gen 2. But it does make disassembly easier in some cases. We try to improve every time we can. So as you can see, I have loosened that same set screw that's in the cocking piece. But now, because this is not threaded, this is spade fit together, I'll show you, you can just begin spinning the bolt nose to unthread the firing pin from the cocking piece. And then it's going to hit a takedown notch and come apart right there. You can continue to unthread this firing pin. And it will eventually, it's very fine threads, come out, and the shroud properly lined up. Get the cocking piece out. has a notch right there. So here's what's different in Gen 2. The shroud that you saw on Gen 1 and Gen 1.2 are threaded. This shroud is not threaded. It has a spade type lug fitting, much the way the bolt body does in your receiver. So the bolt nose is the same way. The bolt nose has a dual lug spade fitting. So really these go back together just like this. Very simple to just get them lined up. And that's how your bolt body and shroud go together on Gen 2. It also makes it that much easier to disassemble, or rather to reassemble. So we will put our shroud in. There's a couple ways to do this. We will put our caulking piece in. We can put our firing pin in and get the threads grabbed and started, and start threading in just like before. Before we get too far, we will get the bolt nose on, find its lugways, where it's happy. Won't quite go yet because we need to get the firing pin in further. But once we get that firing pin in a great portion of the way, we can finish it off with a bolt nose. If you so choose, you can actually build this the other direction first, with the bolt nose off and your fire control separate. I'll show you what that means. There. Now our bolt nose is in. It's got enough distance back for that interference stop to let it keep going. And really we just are going to do the same thing. We're going to just continue to thread the firing pin in through the caulking piece. And it will get to a point where it has gone too far. And you will turn it back 1 full or 3/4 of a revolution so that you can have the set screw settle down into what were those flats on there. And you can give it a little wiggle, you can feel it, get a little more 1/4 of a turn, and you're set. And that is the end of Gen 2. It is that simple. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give us a holler at the shop. We're happy to handle this for you in the shop as well. But we have a lot of questions about, can I do this myself? And I'll let you be the judge of that based on the tools that you want to own and buy or not. Take care.